So we thought today we'd be sort of dissecting the State of the Union address, but it turns out there's plenty of politics to talk about.
That's right. There is a lot of politics to talk about. The president is up. He's tweeting, contradicting his security chiefs. Here's a live look at Capitol Hill, where the State of the Union, as you say, Anne-Marie, was supposed to be held last night. We'll all be here again next week when that happens, hopefully. It was canceled because of the government shutdown, but is rescheduled to take place next week.
Lawmakers have 3 weeks to strike a deal on border wall funding before the government risks running out of money again and shutting back down again. The president's addressed the bipartisan group this morning, of course, on Twitter, saying if the committee is not discussing or contemplating a wall or physical barrier, they are wasting their time.
I love the capitalization, random capitalization.
Yeah, so with us now on the set is CBSN political contributor and reporter for The Guardian, Sabrina Siddiqui, CBSN political contributor and Democratic strategist, Lynda Tran, as well as CBS News contributor and Republican strategist, Leslie Sanchez. So glad you guys are joining us. Thank you.
Great to be here.
Sabrina, I'm going to start with you. Yeah, we were supposed to be hearing about the State of the Union address. Instead, we'll be hearing it next week, Tuesday. But a week and a half after that, all the funding runs out again, and we risk another government shutdown. So that speech is going to be pretty key. What sort of message should the president be sending to ensure we are not facing another government shutdown?
Well, I think if this were any other president, he or she would likely seek a conciliatory tone and try to play up the prospects of a bipartisan compromise. Obviously, this is a different sort of president who has still insisted that he will seek funding for a border wall. And so the big question is, how is he going to lay out his case on immigration? Is he going to engage in a lot of the same kind of sharp anti-immigrant rhetoric that he has in similar speeches in the past, which will ultimately be immediately be a non-starter with Democrats? Or is he going to perhaps soften some of his tone, perhaps allude to him being more willing to accept a more broad package on border security that simply allocates funding toward fencing or infrastructure that Democrats can get behind?
Something vague.
A lot of this sounds like semantics, but that actually might be key to getting to a longer-term funding deal.
Yeah,
so Leslie, let me ask you this. The president has, over the course of the last couple of days, alluded to what he calls his very powerful option, declaring a national emergency. Sarah Sanders was pressed about this a couple of days ago when she held her first press conference in I don't know how many days, when a reporter said, look, how can it be an emergency if you're planning to declare it in 3 weeks, right? By definition, that's not an emergency. I've heard reports that there are some Republicans that are softening their views on whether or not this president could declare a national emergency. What are you hearing from your sources?
Overall, the challenge, and Vlad, you're really kind of hitting on it, and especially if you consider the fact that, like, the Republican National Committee meeting was just held last week, and there's all these internal conversations about how far do we go down this plank with the president, but because he has overwhelmingly led to them winning, led to the majority. So on this issue, they recognize that if they do not have some sort of border security going into 2020, it's the detonation issue. It's that immigration detonation issue that can go either way. So politically looking at the landscape, I think it's a couple of things. If he declares that, he can move forward on that agenda, claim that kind of win.
He'll be challenged in court immediately.
Challenges in court, but okay, that's the semantics, Vlad. It's like, is he really fundamentally doing something to get the resources allocated and elevate the cause of the debate? I'm not saying it's the best approach. But I don't think I think he wants to be able to say, he wants to be able to point in 2020, look, this is the wall, this is the Trump wall, but there won't be a wall.
Does he want to be able to say, I did everything possible, and these unreasonable people, Democrats, are not aware of the crisis that we're dealing with?
People who live on the land?
They're in the pockets of the Democrats.
And we talked about this a little last night, that many see this as the George H.W. Bush, read my lips kind of proposal. He does not deliver on this border wall. It's a one-termer, and that's among the base. So they don't want to hear excuses or funding dilemmas or that there's gridlock in Washington. That's why they selected somebody like who was an pro-reformer, like an outsider like Trump.
Yeah. So the Democratic response to the State of the Union is going to be from Stacey Abrams. If people don't know her, you haven't been paying attention to the news, but she ran for governor in Georgia. She did not win, but the nation was sort of focused on this race, allegations of voter suppression and just general shenanigans. I'll call them shenanigans. What do you make of the Democrats' decision to choose her?
Well, without doubt, Stacey Abrams was one of the bright shining stars of 2018, despite the fact, as you said, said that she lost her race, she was still the first African-American woman to be the nominee for any major party. She still won more votes, in the history of the state. And, as part of the campaign, she was just kind of exciting. She was constantly talking about what was going on, and she had this broad message about unity, but also, a very skilled person when it came to talking about policy. And she is widely viewed by Democrats as a potential candidate against the sitting senator there, Perdue, and just somebody that everybody's got their eyes on. She's, the future of the party.
Interesting.
So, Sabrina, I want to roll out some sound of President Trump's intelligence chiefs all talking about the threats facing this country, and I want to talk about where they are and where the president seems to be. Let's play some of that.
We're well on our way to get denuclearization, and the agreement says there will be total denuclearization.
North Korea will seek to retain its WMD capabilities and is unlikely to completely give up its nuclear weapons.
We have won against ISIS. We've beaten them, and we've beaten them badly.
ISIS will continue to be a threat to the United States.
And they're the largest Sunni terrorist group, and they still command thousands of fighters in Iraq and Syria.
So what's fascinating about this is these are people that President Trump and his administration picked to be the heads of these agencies. Clearly, they're reading the briefing books, and they are not drawing the same conclusions from them that the president is, depending on whether or not you believe that he is or not is not reading those briefing books. Why is there such a difference between what our nation's intelligence officials are saying and what the president of the United States just tweeted about again this morning, refuting what those individuals said in front of the Senate yesterday?
Well, I think the challenge with this president is he wants to project success even when that message is at odds with reality. And so he wants to frame himself as the president who has defeated ISIS. His administration has expanded on the territorial gains under the Obama administration, but as his own intelligence chief said, this is a long battle that will continue. He wants to be able to boast that the historic summit with Kim Jong-un paved the way for denuclearization on the Korean Peninsula, when actually in that framework itself, Pyongyang never actually agreed to dismantle its nuclear weapons program. So the question, though, that this all raises is the president actually well, first of all, is he actually attending these intelligence briefings? He's briefed, most presidents are briefed daily. We know that with this president it hasn't always been the case. Who is actually briefing him on these intelligence matters? And if it is in fact these very same intelligence chiefs who clearly have very different conclusions than this president, then who is actually shaping U.S. foreign policy in this moment, and based on what? Those are going to be some of the big questions, especially as the president is now preparing for what will be a second summit with North Korean leader Kim Jong-un.
But should we be concerned? I don't know, Emory, what you think about this based on what we've been reporting, but on one hand, it looks as if the nation's intelligence officials are doing the work that is required to keep this country safe. They are looking at those threats and they are addressing them, and they are keeping a very sober eye on the actual threats, not the threats at the border, which are practically non-existent, but the threats that really affect us. The president seems out of touch with that, but should we be concerned about that, or should we take some kind of, should we be happy that at least, some adults are looking at the
checks and balances are working?
Yeah, they're working.
When it comes to.
Well, I mean, honestly, I look at this whole back and forth between Trump and Coates, and it makes me think of this Vietnamese saying, if you didn't laugh, you would cry. Because it's a little bit scary. That said, the fact that we have this great professional infrastructure, we have people who stay from administration to administration, they are not partisan about it, that does give you some level of comfort that they are concerned more about the interests of the American people than what's happening on either side of the aisle.
Just really quickly, I would be worried if you think back to just last month when Defense Secretary James Mattis resigned and issued a stunning rebuke of the president, warning that the country was down a perilous path on national security matters, of course, pointing to the president's refusal to strongly reaffirm U.S. support for the NATO alliance. And this administration still has not actually named a replacement for James Mattis. So that really speaks to the impact of this breach between the president and his intelligence and national security team.
It's interesting when you think about it this way, like the long line of history here is very real to the people, to the gentlemen that were at that testifying. Because if you think of, if you harken back even to the counterterrorism intelligence we have, that there was a failure among agencies to share information, to share palatable intelligence.
Pre 9/11.
Exactly, pre 9/11. Post that, there is a lot more. We have our own cells. themselves at having interagency discussions and sharing that kind of counterterrorism information. And that's a very real threat when you speak to them. It was interesting. I was getting calls from individuals within the, the defense industry who were concerned during the government shutdown. They're like, there's a lot of disruption that's happening among very serious decision makers. So they're looking for that stability, and that's why I see that call of unity, all of them standing there really strongly saying this is a threat we need to pay very close attention to. You can add border security if you want, but the reality of all the men of the armed forces out there every day doing missions and drills just to prepare is something that I think we forget when we're so far away, but I think they brought it back to our shore.
It is worth noting on that point about border security that when you look at the assessment that they put out, that was not one of the things that they called out.
They didn't talk about that.
Not at all.
That was striking to me.
Of course, because the president is saying that this is rising to the level of being a national emergency.
It's remarkable because they didn't mention border security at all, at least when it comes to the southern border. The president has only been talking about that.
Exactly.
They talk about all these other issues that they say are still not contained, which the president says is contained. There's some kind of disconnect there, and I think that it's disheartening for some people who are perhaps worried that, on one hand, the president doesn't seem to have a grasp of the issues in the way that his intelligence chiefs do. On the other hand, they're doing the job of keeping America safe.
Well, they're also blending the idea. The president is blending the idea between border security and it's really an immigration issue. You're talking about the flood of individuals coming from Mexico and and South America who into the U.S. that are undocumented. They continue to do so, and there's no fail-safe to ensure that doesn't happen. And then you have a broken immigration system. So that's you get into employment and visas and all these people, asylum, people overstaying. They're like, and yes, you're right. That is a national security threat if you can't protect that. But it's not just the southern border. It's any compromised port of entry. That's the bigger conversation. So you can say it, but yeah, there's drugs, but who's using the drugs? That's the supply and demand.
Exactly.
So yes, national security issue, yes, but not to the extent. It's a different conversation when you're talking about ISIS and Al-Qaeda and the growth in Syria and Afghanistan.
Lynda, before we wrap this up, I want to ask you about something else. The growing sort of list of Democratic candidates for the 2020 presidential election, right? So we've got a few different people. A lot of them, some of them don't have a lot of experience. Kamala Harris is one of them, just a couple of years in Washington. And she's sort of received a bit of criticism about her health care proposal. And part of it being we wouldn't need insurance companies anymore. As former Starbucks CEO, Howard Schultz called it not American. But that's just an example of perhaps a left-leaning policy that has gotten criticism from everyone. Tell me about the balance that some of these candidates are going to have to strike, because there's definitely been a push within the Democratic Party to sort of be a little more progressive, since the last election, but you don't want to go too progressive that you alienate moderates.
Well, I think, honestly, all of the Democratic candidates are just going to have to be true to who they are. They have to say and do what they actually believe. They have to promote a vision that they really want to see carried out if they actually take office. So, rather than some of the political, calculations and whatnot that may have come into play in previous elections, I would really encourage free advice to all the Democratic candidates. Do and say what you actually mean and have a plan for carrying it out, whether, it's about making sure the numbers align or just having the details to it, rather than trying to cater either to the far left, the moderate left, or what have you.
Right.
Sabrina, Lynda, Leslie, so great to have all of you here on set this morning with us. Hopefully we'll have you guys
next week.
Next week.
Yes.
When the State of the Union actually happens. Thank you guys so much.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.